Since its first performance in 1928, Ravel's Bolero has had an immeasurable effect on artistic and musical cultures across the world. But this popularity has led some to dismiss it as just another classical work played too often and heard too much, a stand-in for so many other 20th century orchestral pieces that are, for many, more interesting and more complex. But I think to consider it in this light is not to see or hear this piece for what it really is. Bolero is a radical masterpiece, an orchestral tour de force, but it's also a very human work of art that can, if we let it, tell us not only about the life of the man behind the music, but also about his death and about the condition which accompanied Ravel during his final years. Through this 14-minute journey, we're going to find out how Bolero was written, but also why it was written and what we can learn from its infectious music. By this point in the piece, every musical component of the score has been established. The snare drum has repeated its 2-bar pattern over 15 times and will continue to play it until the final notes of the piece. This ostinato is constructed so that we never tire of the rhythm. Instead, we internalize it. Our ears latch onto the regular 8th notes, but there is just enough variety provided by the triplet 16th notes that it never feels boring or predictable. It's the perfect balance of control and chaos. Underneath this sits another ostinato, this time a harmonic one. Violas and cellos repeat a pizzicato phrase, playing 3 notes in succession. C, G, G. A constant rolling cadence played on the open strings, giving it a rich, resonant feel. These two ideas combined are the rhythmical and harmonic backbone of the music, and on top of these repeated fragments sits the melody. Okay, so we've now reached bar 57, and by this point Ravel has already given us the 2 primary melodies in the piece. This one is the second minor version, which is full of blues notes and accidentals. Ravel referred to these melodies as folk tunes of the Spanish Arabian kind, but this melody could just as easily be classified as jazz. It returns to B-flats, D-flats and A-flats constantly, which clash beautifully with the harmonic ostinato underneath, creating a charged atmosphere, a tension where the soloist is trying to pull the music in one direction, whilst the pizzicato strings are keeping the music firmly rooted in C major. The other melody, the major variation, is, on the other hand, very much rooted in the harmonic language of the piece. It emphasizes the notes of the diatonic scale instead of the blues notes, but is constructed in a very similar way to the melody we've just heard. Both are built out of alternating long and short notes. A held note which grows into legato 16th notes. Sometimes the short notes go across the bar lines, sometimes they sit within the bar, but they never feel rushed or cursory. Every rhythm is controlled, every note carefully chosen, and every interval deliberately placed within the phrase. These melodies are meticulously designed, but they're also the most human aspect of the piece. Their legato have a singing quality, and they're predominantly heard, at least in the opening, as solos and duets. You can't get more human than a person playing an exposed melody by themselves, with every tiny variation in tone and articulation that comes with this. And these melodies, combined with the rhythmic and harmonic ostinatos, are the only elements of the music, repeated multiple times, hardly varying throughout the piece. As Ravel put it before the first performance, there are no contrasts, and there is practically no invention save the plan and the manner of execution. So what was Ravel's plan? His idea was to create one enormous orchestral crescendo, transforming the hushed and almost inaudible sounds at the beginning into a monumental orchestral tutti at the end. The obvious way to do this, of course, is with dynamics, but even with the multiple gradations between the quietest dynamic, pianissimo, and the loudest, fortissimo, there isn't enough variation in these to sustain a crescendo over a long period of time. So, to realise his plan, Ravel combined alterations in dynamics with alterations in orchestration. Just listen to the music here. The tenor saxophone is about to finish its minor melody, and after this, oboes and cor anglais will join the pizzicato strings in playing the harmonic ostinato. The woodwind chords add to the volume, but they also completely change the colour of the string sound. The dominant character in the chord comes from the oboe and cor anglais, but at the front of the sound, we hear the percussive attack of the pizzicato notes, and at the end, we're left with the ringing of the resonating strings after they've been plucked. Ravel constantly plays with orchestral colour in this way, using it to not only develop and alter the nature of the harmonic and rhythmic ostinatos, but also the melodies. As we return to the major melody, the tune is played for the first time by more than 2 instruments, a horn, 2 piccolos, and a celeste. But Ravel doesn't just stack the melody in octaves, as you'd expect. The horn is the dominant voice, but on top, we hear the melody both a 12th and a 17th higher than the horn in piccolos, combined with the celeste playing an octave and a 15th higher than the principal melody. What results is a set of parallel chords. But this isn't really a polytonal texture. Because Ravel asks the horn to play mezzo forte, the celeste piano, and the piccolo's pianissimo, we don't hear the piccolo and celeste lines as individual melodies, but instead as isolated harmonics of the principal horn melody. This is a technique he will continue to use from this point onwards, bringing out different harmonics for different iterations, adding vibrancy and brilliance to the orchestral sound as the music progresses. And in total, we will hear each of the 2 melodies 9 times, on top of 169 repetitions of the snare drum ostinato. This music is disarmingly simple in its construction. So where did it come from? What inspired Ravel to write this piece? In the summer of 1928, Ravel was approached by dancer Ida Rubinstein to provide music for a new ballet, initially asking him to orchestrate some movements from Spanish composer Isaac Albanese's suite for piano, Iberia. But after Ravel began work, he found out that another composer had been given exclusive rights to arrange and orchestrate Albanese's music. And so, only a few months before the scheduled premiere, Ravel decided to write an original work instead. Bolero was first performed at the end of 1928 at the Opéra Comique in Paris, danced by Rubinstein, with choreography by Bronislava Nijinská, with the setting for this performance being inspired by the ballet's Spanish roots. But Ravel had a very different setting in mind when writing this piece. Bolero, in his own words, owed its inception to a factory. Ravel had been fascinated by machines and mechanical devices from a very early age. I visited factories very often as a small boy with my father. It was these machines, their clicking and roaring, which, with the Spanish folk songs sung by my mother, formed my first instruction in music. And these experiences found their way into his compositions. His first attempt at a full-length opera, La Cloche Engloutie, was set partly in a giant bell foundry. He composed a setting of Hoffmann's Der Sandmann about a hyper-realistic mechanical doll, and his first staged opera from 1911 features clocks and mechanical devices as significant parts of the narrative. What a musical story there is in a factory. Musicians, together with historians and writers of fiction, must carry on the tale of the mechanics of this age to our children and our children's children. Bolero was written after a lifetime of obsessing over machines. The percussive pizzicato strings and woodwind chords are mechanical cogs turning over. The snare drum pattern is the rhythmical clacking of metal emanating from some colossal machine, and the melodies are the product of this industrial process, created by auto-generative means, instruments built from fused parts, stacked like girders of steel on top of the mechanical stirrings of this musical factory. But there is still one thing left to discover in this piece. At the first performance of Bolero, a woman got up from her seat and, clutching the exit door with 2 hands, cried out in a loud voice, "Oh fou, oh fou, crazy, crazy." When Ravel was told about this afterwards, he responded by saying that she is the only one who really understood. This music might come across as sensual and erotic to some people, as aggressive and mechanical to others, but maybe like me, or like the woman at the premiere, you hear the anguish and suffering hidden inside the music. During the final years of his life, Ravel's health rapidly went downhill. Although not formally diagnosed until after his death, Ravel had Wernicke's aphasia, a neurodegenerative condition where lesions on the brain result in the breakdown of language and motor skills. In 1927, a year before Bolero was written, Ravel's friends started to notice changes in his behavior. He was increasingly absent-minded, struggled with his handwriting, and the insomnia which he had battled throughout his life was getting worse. Then, in 1932, Ravel suffered a blow to the head after being hit by a taxi, and after this, his condition significantly worsened. By the end of his life, his aphasia had almost completely removed his ability to write or process language, including musical language. He couldn't play, read, or compose music, and in all likelihood, this condition had started to develop long before Bolero was conceived. But the question is, can we hear this in the music? In a 2007 study into the effects of aphasia on artists, researchers from the University of British Columbia, Canada, looked at how the creative output of an artist, Anne Adams, changed as her condition worsened through the final years of her life. Adams had a lifelong interest in art and music, but only took up painting seriously when she was in her 40s. And of all of her projects, the one which was closest to her heart was a visual rendering of Bolero. In it, she uses several rectangular blocks, one for each bar in the piece, with the heights of the blocks representing the dynamics and the colour representing the harmony. But most importantly for our story is both when and why Adams created this painting. This work of art, just like Bolero, represents an exercise in symmetry and patterns and was produced a number of years before symptoms of aphasia arose for Adams. And in the same way, when Ravel wrote Bolero, it was a long while before his condition was recognised or his symptoms classified. But maybe like Adams, he chose to create a hypersymmetric and repetitive work of art because it was appealing to someone whose neural pathways were becoming increasingly tuned to exactly this sort of structure brought on by the early stages of aphasia. It's impossible to know exactly what led Ravel to want to write this piece, but knowing that the condition that would eventually kill him had most likely started to take hold when he was writing Bolero, it's hard to hear the obsessive rhythms, the hallucinating insistence of the musical themes, and the deafening violence of the accents, and, like the woman at the first performance, not cry out in despair, "Oh foo, oh foo." And yet, most people will not know the piece in this context. They'll know it as choreographers, as listeners, as dancers, as musicians, and they'll hear the hope and beauty in the music instead of the darkness and pain. Ravel may have revealed something about his own struggles and suffering through the music, but despite this, or maybe because of this, Bolero gives us the strength to come to terms with our own suffering. The strength to keep going, to keep moving forwards, to keep breathing and repeating and hoping and loving, to keep dancing. Thank you so much for watching. I was actually inspired to create this video after watching a fascinating documentary on CuriosityStream about Bolero and the wide-reaching cultural impact that the piece has had. It goes into great depth about the many ways that the piece has been reinterpreted and reimagined. And if you want to watch this alongside thousands of other documentaries, then you can sign up to CuriosityStream using the link in the description below or by going to curiositystream.com/listening-in. And for just over $14 or £10 a year, you'll not only get access to all of CuriosityStream's films, but you'll also get access to my streaming service, Nebula, completely free. Nebula is a platform run by creators, and there you can not only find ad-free versions of all my videos, but also extended editions of my essays, as well as standalone bonus videos. There are so many amazing creators on Nebula, including people like Adam Neely, Lindsay Ellis, and one of my new favourite creators, Mary Spender. And so by signing up using the link below, you're not only supporting this channel, but also so many other content creators. See you next time.